America's Cannabis Conversation. Heard every Saturday at 4:20 p.m. online at americascannabisconversation.com. We're part of the W420 Radio Network, and each week we provide you with information, education, and insight into the exploding medical and recreational cannabis industry. You'll hear from industry leaders, elected officials, local experts, detractors, and more. Learn how to build your own cannabis business, how to grow the product, what's legal, and where it's legal. Tune in each week to hear updates from the National Cannabis Industry Association in Washington, tips on investing in cannabis markets, personal success stories, and more. It's now time to join America's Cannabis Conversation. Time now for the lowdown on another high time experience. Here's 420 lifestyle correspondent Rich Walkoff.
You never know who you're going to run into at the Emerald Cup here in Santa Rosa, California. It's BriAnne Rose tag teaming it from Colorado to California because it is all about being in compliance now that California has become maybe the most highly regulated California cultivating state, and Colorado wrote the book on it. So, Bri, let's start with you. You're with a company that consults and is probably guiding a lot of companies in California on compliance, because that is the big operative word now.
Yeah, absolutely. So we build compliance operations infrastructure where we come in and do all of the shortcuts of the labor costs and the other nuances that you probably don't know coming into a compliance market. So we will come in and do an assessment, we'll identify any gaps, and then we'll also help build that infrastructure and any training on top of that to make you sustainable actually without us in the long term. And more importantly, skip all these labor costs that you have to go through and trial and error and also compliance risk, and just not have those direct answers and know how other mature markets have handled these compliance aspects.
And Rose, first thing you said to me is from seed to sale. So just expound upon that, because it is tracked. The cannabis product is tracked from its inception.
It sure is, and the challenges there come about when you're talking about every step of the way, something has to be tracked. So for cultivation, it's extremely difficult to track every waste that comes off a large plant, especially when you're talking about one farmer on that farm, or if you're talking about manufacturing and all of the waste that they're, accruing and whatnot, and how they're supposed to track getting rid of that waste. Pretty much every step in the supply chain has some issues with holes in the tracking trace that could be easily fixed by the regulation.
Okay, now, if I purchase a seed, it's going to be tagged. If I grow a plant and it produces seeds, it's going to be tagged. How does that work?
Yeah, so essentially by the time that is a seed, usually you collect seeds at harvest most time, or other times like before harvest. And let's say I'm collecting all of those seeds, I would put a tag on those seeds, and then those seeds have to be transferred to a distribution license, and then that distribution license to the retailer, and then finally to the consumer. And between there, like if it isn't seeds, you would have testing. If you're talking about trim all the way to an edible, there's going to be different steps from crude oil to distillate to your first batch of manufactured goods to your final form production. So there's just so many steps that you have to do to make sure that you're tracking every single bit.
Yeah, this is pretty cumbersome, and then maybe that's why the black market continues to maybe rule the day, because with all the permits, the costs, and you're talking about the tracking of seed to sale, that's pretty cumbersome, not only bureaucratically, but financially.
It sure is, and especially like splitting up the license structure, it actually makes it more difficult for people to be in-house cultivator to the retail. So, because you have to be a distributor to test your product, because you have to have a nursery license to sell your seeds, it just makes it a lot harder to be able to afford these things, and they had been doing it forever. So now that they have to pay to play, it's just making it more difficult.
Now, did California replicate Colorado's plan, or did they make it more cumbersome?
They did not. I mean, it depends on what you're talking about. Yeah. But I think the structure of the licensing is where it's most different. And they were trying to avoid those larger conglomerates of, people coming in and taking over the industry. But really what they're doing is hurting the small farms and hurting the smaller manufacturing and stuff because they need to accrue all these licenses to keep up with the big guys.
Yeah. One thing they did do well is that we have one supply chain. So like Colorado, which actually in 2020 we're switching to one supply chain. Massachusetts and Michigan are actually doing it incorrect because they have two supply chains internally. They have a medical inventory and they have an adult use inventory. At least California, for the most part, the majority of products are all funneled through one supply chain, and the time of purchase is what determines a consumer, an adult use, or a medical, which makes inventory management significantly more easier for everyone else to that point at retail.
So now you guys are consultants, and you're probably helping the little guy more than the big guy because they already have a leg up, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're helping all over across the board because, you know, if you're helping the small guy, in the end, you are helping the big guy, you know, because the big guys, so in some ways, are supporting some of the smaller people by, you know, helping get the name out and helping spread the brand. But all in all, we're helping anyone that needs it.
Yep, and those small guys are like pretty much setting up the big guys for success. So they're like, okay, I have my stuff internally structured because I hired an outside consultant to help me. And so now I just made everything easier for the big guys if I were to sell them my product or help them with distribution or packaging and all of that kind of stuff.
You know, some cynics would say this is by design. All this rigmarole, bureaucracy, and challenging legal regulations are making it harder for the small grower and cultivator to keep up with the major agribusiness corporations that are going to, you know, power play them.
Yeah, agreed. And it's all about communication with the regulators. You know, the more that they're willing to open up and listen, the better it's going to be. And I just spoke to someone with the CDFA, and she was really open to hearing out more consultants because she knows that we hear it all from all walks of the supply chain. You know, we're a really good funnel for that. And so if you're using like social groups like HCGA or something like that to communicate, maybe, you know, consultants can be part of that too.
Okay, you threw some acronyms at it. CDFA, is that a California Department of Farming?
Food and Agriculture.
Food and Agriculture.
Yeah, so they overlook all of cultivation regulations, so they're really the ones that can change stuff on the cultivation level. And then the HCGA is the Humboldt County Growers Alliance, who has about I don't know how many farms, but they speak for many farms with one voice.
Okay. So did Colorado really write the script, and it would be best if other states followed to make it more equitable?
I mean, there's always room for improvement. I mean, it's in the beginning of an industry, so I think that that's what's so beautiful about this is that we can keep on adapting and keep learning. So I appreciate other markets taking what we've developed and tweaking it to be their own. Like this whole supply chain is a great example. How the equity program is super important in California. We don't have an equity program in Colorado. I think that's extremely important. So I love seeing them take things and change it. But I do think from a regulatory standpoint, we do have a pretty solid infrastructure. I mean, Denver, where we come from specifically in Colorado, they say there's more dispensaries than Starbucks in our county, so we're heavily regulated. And I think there's aspects as to that can be applied to other states, like the traceability software. It doesn't matter which software it is, at least like you're tracking everything. So if other states can do it, yes, California should be able to do it too. But I mean, it is the 5th, 6th largest economy in the world. Like we have such high volume and velocity here. It is a bit challenging.
Yeah, and Bri and I always talk about like we're surprised that these other states aren't jumping off from a Colorado point. You know, using what we've already learned in the past 10 years of working through stuff, we're actually surprised that some states are just reinventing the wheel when it's already been invented.
Yeah, why do you think that is?
Maybe because they think they can do it better,
right.
Or they don't want to take the time to learn what we put into place, which is just ridiculous because they're going to go through the same things that we
Sure.
did, and you know, it just would be easier to, you know, look at history, and history repeats itself, and why not look at the state that started it?
Right, if somebody paved the way, don't ignore the progress that they've made. Now, what about policing and monitoring and, keeping track? Because that may be a challenge in and of itself with the enormous grows that are all over the state of California and elsewhere.
Yeah, so in Colorado we had a few years where it was like the learning process for the regulators, and then we saw more and more involvement in the regulators coming to audit these grows. So like currently in California, we're still at the learning state. You know, the regulators are still learning, they're still thinking of ways to audit, especially cultivators. And the cultivators are thinking, okay, we have a couple more years to get away with stuff. So I think that they're really going to freak out once they actually have that, you know, that regulator at their door. And it's the same process. They're going to come. And I think so the CDFA has hired some auditors to look at metrics specifically in California. And it's just a matter of time before they find those outliers.
They just need the data. Data's power. And so now, because we do have that traceability software in, like we get that data now. And so they'll be able to understand outdoor versus mixed light versus indoor and what the average yields are. Like, yes, there's a full spectrum there, but they'll be able to find what that happy medium is and who those outliers are and where enforcement potentially will.
Okay, we may know seed to sale, but do we know what happened in the interim? Do we know what chemicals, if any, were used that shouldn't have been used? What abnormalities may have been involved in the grow?
She's the testing expert.
How about the lab testing? Because that's key. I mean, people get a smoke, they say, oh, I love that flower, this is a great strain, but you don't know necessarily how it got there, or do you?
Currently now with track and trace you do. And amendments, and they do not need to be tracked at this moment, but they will in the future. In Colorado, we have to track everything that touches that plant. And then where testing comes in, it's actually a lot more stringent in California. And I really enjoy the California testing model more because the lab actually comes out and pulls those samples, whereas in Colorado, you self-pull the samples. So say I am the dispensary, I'm pulling my own samples to send to the lab. That can get a little interesting. So I really enjoy the California model of, you know, the lab comes out and makes sure that they're pulling an accurate sample.
Right, instead of the fox guarding the chicken coop.
Yep.
Because if I'm a grower and I want to cut corners, I'm going to tell you everything I did was up and up, and it may not be the truth. So California's regulations are more stringent.
Yes, and currently we're not tracking that in the track and trace system, but there is an area to do that within Metric. So I can just see in the next couple of years that becoming mandated.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I think we do need more improvement on is more consumer-facing transparency. Like in Mendocino and Humboldt and Trinity, there used to be a different traceability platform in those counties called Cal Origin or SICPA. And that I really liked because it was actually consumer facing, that there was a label on the packaging where you could see the actual entire supply chain until you received that product as a consumer. Metric, Franwell's Metric, which is the state traceability platform that we're using now, does not have that feature as a consumer. So I definitely think that's something that needs to be expanded on to have that transparency as a consumer that I can see every single step of the way.
Well, as every consumer would want to know, what am I ingesting?
Exactly.
What am I eating? What am I vaping? What am I smoking? And is it as advertised?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all education, like you're saying. So, you know, having that small farmer that never adds anything to the soil, having that communicated to the consumer on a level that is like health and safety is, you know, the next step. And we're definitely in that right now. We're veering away from, with the vape cartridge scare and stuff like that. I think people are more willing to educate themselves on where their product is coming from.
Yeah, speaking about the vape cartridge scare, am I correct in saying it's more of the Chinese knockoff products that are not regulated and not domestically monitored here in the States? Or are there other components or aspects to it?
There are so one thing is we're seeing other states transition from just terpenes to cannabis derived terpenes, because when you have natural terpenes, sometimes those are actually cut with vitamin E acetate. So
and that's the dangerous stuff.
And that's the dangerous stuff. So I don't think it's nearly as frequent as other markets or other international players or anything like that, but there's definitely other scares, and I kind of appreciate this vape crisis because it's actually bringing to light how testing works and how it's important as a consumer to know what you're putting into your body, and it goes back to sun-grown cannabis and why you should be using different products and things from farms that are truly natural and as organic as we can say as organic. And it's really important because this is truly medicine and people are using it truly as medicine, and you can't be putting more toxins in your body.
So do you think we're safe in consuming cannabis that has that seal from the state of California or Colorado or other states that authenticate its organic nature?
Absolutely.
So vaping is not an issue.
Well, if it's been lab tested and you're buying it from a legal retail shop, you have a higher chance of surviving.
Yes.
That's not a ringing endorsement. A higher chance of survival. I want to hear you say, you're safe.
The one thing that Bree and I talk about is there's going to be traceability from where those terpenes came from where those cartridges came from. It's going to be more of, the hardware. It's going to be, more tracking every component of that product. So I think we'll see that.
As it should be, right? I mean, this is a win-win. It's a win for the grower. It's a win for the consumer. I mean, I want to know what I'm putting in my body like everyone else, especially with the scares that have become all too prevalent. Ladies, again, your consulting company and how consumers or interested cultivators would be able to reach you?
We help the whole supply chain. So we are Rocky Mountain Cannabis Consulting. You can find us on Instagram,
Twitter,
Facebook, and our website is rmcc.io if you guys want to check us out.
Or RockyMountainCannabisConsulting.com. Either one
sounds
will
great.
get us there.
Well, I feel better and safer after having talked to you about the monitoring of whatever we're ingesting in the cannabis side. We're at the Emerald Cup. Rich Walkoff from W420 Radio Network.
Are you interested in learning more about cannabis? Have you thought about starting your own cannabis business but don't know how? If so, we invite you to join the Cannabis Conversation with other people like you who are looking at the exciting opportunities in this exploding business. Listen to America's Cannabis Conversation. You'll hear from industry experts and get insights into the cannabis industry. For archived shows and for more information, log on to americascannabisconversation.com. It's time for Women in Cannabis on America's Cannabis Conversation, part of the W420 Radio Network.
Didn't you get the memo?
Here's Chase Roberts.
This is Chase Roberts, Women in Cannabis correspondent for the W420 Radio Network. It is a pleasure to introduce Nancy Birnbaum, founding publisher of Sensi NorCal. She is the cannabis industry connector. Nancy, welcome. Thanks for being here. How are you?
Hi, Chase. I'm well. Thanks for having me.
So great to have you here. I wanted to ask you, how long have you been in the cannabis space?
Wow, I think I'm going on 6 years now. It's
that's a long time.
Yeah, it's not compared to some folks that I'm in my community. It's not that long, but it's been a really great 6 years.
Did you grow up in California?
Originally, I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, and I left for California as soon as I could when I graduated high school.
It makes sense. I think a lot of people did. I like to say they call it the Golden State for a reason. Did you ever envision when you were younger that you would be in this space?
No, not actually. I had spent the summer before my senior year of high school in San Francisco with my cousins and taking care of their kids, and for the summer taking them all around the city and doing things with them, kind of as almost like a, nanny. And I literally left my heart in San Francisco and I had to move there.
So easy to do.
Right.
And I wanted you to tell our listeners about your company, Sensi NorCal. What is it exactly? It's an entity. I know it's one of the leading sources for news in the cannabis space. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, it's a little different than that. So Sensi Magazine is one of the leading publications in the cannabis space, and Sensi Media was started by our founder Ron Cole back in 2017 in Denver, and has grown since then to be before COVID, we actually had 17 print publications around the country. I started the first or published the first Bay Area edition of Sensi just before COVID. in November of 2019. So I launched the first one in the Bay Area. It was called the North Bay edition of Sensi because we were kind of on a track to have a San Francisco edition and a Silicon Valley edition. And then I had 5 issues out before COVID hit, and it kind of stopped us in our tracks for a while. I call it our pandemic pause.
Oh, I like that.
We couldn't deliver our magazines anywhere. We couldn't do our famous events that we're so well known for. And so we had to focus on a more digital distribution and really being able to increase our reach, which I think we did really well over that COVID pause. In fact, we became the #1 read magazine publication online at that point.
Congratulations. That's really
Thank you. Yeah, it was a great effort on everybody's part, but it was between November of 2020 and July of last year that we kind of overtook everybody, including High Times, which was great. A young magazine.
Isn't High Times has been around since the 70s.
Right. It's one of the oldest publications in the space for sure. So Sensi is more of a city magazine type of, with a focus on arts and culture and health and wellness, and all plant medicine, not just cannabis. And, it really is a different from all the other publications out there, and is read by everybody, including from the canna curious all the way up through the canna investors. So everybody in the industry reads it, as well as people who are just starting to learn about cannabis and the health aspects of the plant and all the great new products that are coming out, and from how to decorate your space and your bong cart to all the great things that are happening locally. So each of our markets, which include Colorado now, of course, where we started, California, Michigan, Massachusetts, Florida has just come back online in January, and we're just about to launch Oklahoma. In April, we're going to be launching Oklahoma with a great big party in Oklahoma City, which I wish I could.
Are you going?
I wish I could.
Yeah, I'm sure that's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that.
I was going to say, you guys are really known for your events as well. And I remember last year at MJ BizCon, the party was the Sensi Zodiac VIP party was the party to go to.
Yeah. We partner with Dave Tran and Fairchild Events. They do I think the best events in the cannabis industry. And we partner every year at MJ BizCon to do what is known as the e-ticket party for that cannabis week in Vegas. And yeah, that one was really special. It was great. Everybody wants to be going to those events. And then we also had our national Sensi Connect, which is our B2B event. We do a national one in Vegas every year. And that one we did at the top of the stratosphere last October. And it was a lot of fun.
Awesome. And, going into that, what are some of the networking and events you guys put together?
Yeah, just kind of circling back to who we are. Like you said, Sensi is known for our events, and we're really focused on the community building. Every one of the publishers and all of our sales team, we're really about building community. And part of what we offer in our packages, for advertising, is really access to all of those events. And they include virtual events, because we do a Sensi Connects virtual networking event twice a month, every other week, in each of our markets. And that brings, anybody can join that platform and start connecting and networking with people all over the country. But in each market, we do a call, almost like a Zoom call, except we're using a different platform. And it's a great way to get your brand out there, to talk about, to meet other people in the industry who are doing something similar to you. We have a community set up in that platform, Sensi Connects platform, for every market. Plus we have specialty communities like retails and brands or tech. So it's a really good way for anybody in the industry to start networking. I think at some point it's going to be the biggest B2B network in the cannabis space.
It sounds well on its way. And
Yeah.
for our listeners, how can they find out about these events? What is the best website they should go to?
Yeah, they could go to connects.sensimag.com and create a profile for free and start joining those calls.
You hear that, everyone? Go check it out.
Connects.sensimag.com. That's the URL that you'd want to go to. And they can also, of course, reach out to me, and I'm on all the social platforms, as well as they can reach me with my email, which is a little harder to spell out, but it's nancy.birnbaum@sensimag.com. And my last name is spelled BIRNBAUM.
Yeah. And with all this connecting and community building you do, is there some points in your career where you're like, wow, we really did something amazing, or created a partnership that stands out in your mind, or connected the right people where it just was kind of kismet, magical?
Wow, that's a tough question to answer because it happens all the time.
Yeah.
It's what I do. I'm known as the connector here in NorCal because, I'm all about helping companies grow their business. And so when I'm talking to any particular organization or company or brand, I'm always asking questions about how they're doing and what they're doing and what they've got coming up and how I can plug them into my network or what they might need. So it might be a cultivator that's looking to connect with somebody on a wholesale side and sell flower. It might be a manufacturer that's looking to connect with cultivators so that they can get flower for extracts or something. It could be a brand that's just starting out and needs to find a manufacturer, or has a new product that they're looking to do and they want a formulator or a marketing company to help them get the word out. I'm always making those kinds of connections for people. And so I really find that the ones that I've worked with closer, and maybe brought them into the Sensi fold and the Sensi family and offered them the opportunity to do branding in the magazine as well as show up at all of our events. They're the ones that I think really find the benefit through all of those. We call them multiple points of engagement, a lot of different ways for people to engage in the industry through us. So that my network kind of comes with that. And I'm always making those connections for people. And it could, I think I've helped a lot of different kinds of companies expand their business by making those introductions. There's so many that it would be hard to pick one or two and say, this is really the special one. When I bring on a new retailer into my network, I'm helping them figure out what brands they should have on the shelves. I have a really good contact list and network of great brands. And most recently, let's say it was a dispensary here in Santa Rosa, Jane Dispensary, and they're really focused to women. And so I wanted them to make sure that they were in touch with all the women-owned companies and brands that they could be supporting.
That's amazing. And so important. I mean, that's partly why we're doing this segment, Women in Cannabis, because in general, we were finding originally they weren't being so supported. You have a master's degree in social psychology and organizational development. Mm-hmm. And that has to factor into you being the great connector. Has it been so beneficial? Is that really what kind of propelled you into this space to be able to do? I mean, you're really impressive. The list of stuff you do is really, you do everything. You do mentoring, digital advertising, ad sales, blogging, branding, coaching, consulting, really all of it. It's just, it feels like your background has really set you up to really be in this space.
Yeah, it certainly has. And even though I didn't actually ever work in specifically in organizational development, working with big companies. Because when I graduated, it wasn't a time that companies were putting money into that. It happened later in Silicon Valley. But even though I didn't really ever work specifically in that space, it's always come in handy in looking at how organizations work and how companies are set up, and being able to help on all these different levels. But I think really it comes from how I was raised. I come from a family of my parents were very social and involved in politics, and I got involved in politics early on in Maryland and Baltimore, and so I think that's probably helped me the most in just being comfortable and talking to people about anything. And then I really invested a lot of time when I first got involved in the cannabis industry, which is when I helped launch Women's Cannabis Business Development here in Sonoma County, which was also called Women's CBD. And that was just a great way for me to start meeting people in the industry, bringing people together with events every month, and then learning about every segment. And it took a few years for me to really get a handle, be able to talk to people about production, about packaging, about cultivating, about compliance and policy and all of these things. I really enjoyed learning all of those things, and now I can put them to good use.
This industry, in particular, everybody wants in, but they don't realize everything involved. Yeah. And so I think if you're a newcomer, it takes a while to get assimilated, like you're saying. Yeah. And just out of curiosity, because you do know all sides of the industry, do you notice any current trends that are happening in the industry, like scaling back in one area, or do you see anything, big picture stuff?
Yeah, I think I've been pretty much spot on this year with my predictions from late last year.
Oh, I want to hear.
That this is the year for M&As. So we're seeing a lot of mergers and acquisitions in the industry, particularly here in California, because it has been a struggle under the current policy around Prop 64, where it's been very hard for competition. It's been very hard for cultivation because, we're growing a lot in California. All up and down the state. But we don't have a lot of retail opportunities because so many municipalities have been able to opt out and not allow cannabis to be sold in their areas. And that makes for a real kind of bottleneck. Absolutely. There's not enough places to sell that flower, and more people are developing products, and expanding their product and their SKUs, which is good. But it's been a rough time over the last couple of years for sure. And then every specific municipality has their own challenges around permitting and what's allowed. So it's been a little hard, particularly here in NorCal. And so I see that people are positioning their companies as they're growing them for that possible merger and acquisition exit. And also, as you mentioned, it's been really hard for women owners to make ends meet. And so many of the ones that I started with Women's CBD have bootstrapped in, all this time. They've been managing to keep their companies going with a lot of amazing balancing acts. And really, I have to give credit to, companies like the Garden Society and Aaron Gore and Charlie, who just earned some of the biggest money, just got a $7 million investment so they can start expanding, not just here in California, but also around the country. And that has been really, really hard to get that investment money for women. And so there's people that are just doing such hard work right now, like Big Rock and Joyce Sinali at Big Rock, who's really been helping women with that investment piece. So it's just really good to see the right players and people supporting women in the industry. I'm also working with another group called Women. It was called Women Empowered in Cannabis, or WEIC. Now it's called Women Employed in Cannabis.
Oh, okay.
And, Kara Reed has started that, and with some other great women that we know. And now we're partnering with them, with Sensi, to start doing more events for women in the industry all over the country, not just here in California. But we're just getting ready to launch the first one, which is going to be like a potluck. So a really easy, a nice, fun event for women to come together here in the Bay Area. I think that's going to be here in Sonoma County in just a couple months. So we're really excited to be launching this all over the country in each of the Sensi markets, so that we can, again, just start bringing women together in a safe space that allows them to get all the information they need or ask the questions that they've been wanting to ask or felt uncomfortable asking in a room with men in the,
so necessary.
in the room.
And I actually really want to go to that event. I think it's going to be so beneficial to so many. And, our time is running out, which is so crazy, but do you have any parting advice for women looking to get into the industry?
I'd have to say that it really comes down to reaching out. The one thing I love about our industry, and maybe that's more so true in California than elsewhere, we're really about working together and not as competitive as other industries that I've seen. So reach out, join the groups that are on Facebook and other groups like WEIC. We have a group that you can join on Facebook, and start reaching out and asking for the things that you need so that you can start getting connected to various networks and get help.
Well, Nancy, thank you for being here today. Really appreciate it. I would love to have you back at some time.
Thanks. I appreciate it, Chase. It's been great chatting with you.
If you missed any of this great interview with Nancy Birnbaum, you can go to W420radionetwork.com and click on the archive section to listen to this and other great interviews. And we'll be right back.
America's newest and fastest growing cannabis-focused radio network is expanding across the country and looking to add to our sales and marketing team. America's Cannabis Conversation offers listeners insight and information on the exploding world of cannabis. It also gives advertisers the opportunity to reach a hyper-targeted audience, literally neighborhood by neighborhood, in markets all across the country. We're looking for a few motivated individuals that want to essentially run their own local business. To learn more about this exciting opportunity or to apply, visit americascannabisconversation.com.
Welcome to America's Cannabis Conversation. I'm your host, David Katzmeyer, and today we're going to be talking about Unitec Laboratories. This is a company that does cannabis, hemp, and CBD oil testing for growers and various members of the cannabis industry. Testing is essential to comply with government regulations and to ensure quality control. Without this testing, the chain of going from seed to sell would not work because we have to be compliant, we have to have regulations met. And this is what's giving us our quality cannabis and all byproducts. So to learn a little bit about this, we reached out to A Better World Media and Promotions at A Better World. That's where Mitchell Rabin hosts A Better World Radio and TV and various other forms of media. He also happens to be on the advisory board of Unitech Labs. And so consequently, he has invited top executives of Unitec Laboratories, CEO Stephen Taylor, and Chairman Gary Smith. So Mitchell, welcome to the program. Stephen Taylor, Gary Smith, welcome to the program. And Mitchell, tell us please a little bit about Unitec Laboratories.
Okay, David, thanks so much for having us on the show. We really appreciate being here. I like to say that the lab business in the cannabis space is like the sleeping giant. It's behind everything, but it's not so visible. And as a result, it's actually a giant kind of business. So we really like to kind of pride ourselves on being big, but a little invisible. It's kind of fun. On that note, I do have a couple of giants to join us here today. Stephen Taylor is really the initial brains behind this operation. Stephen has been in the space for decades. He's an attorney since 1981. He's focused on cannabis law and procedural compliance issues since 2005. In 2017, following the legalization of recreational cannabis, founded SCMC Professionals in one of the first testing labs in California. He sold off his interest in Convergence and began Unitec Labs in 2019, and the initial focus was on Michigan, Illinois, with Florida and New York closely behind. Virginia is coming on board, I understand, as recently as today. This is good news as we watch the world change. Also, we have with us Gary Smith, chairman of the board of Unitec Labs. Gary has an MBA from San Francisco State University. He's been in practice as a tax accountant since 1988 and a financial advisor since 1993. Gary, in his professional capacity, guides the company forward in its own compliance with the rules and regulations. So this company is on its way to tremendous, tremendous success. On that note, I'd really love to turn to Steve Taylor and ask him to speak a little bit about the direction of the company and what you also see, Steve, as the direction of the industry.
All right, thank you for that introduction. I never really thought of myself as a giant in the industry, but I think I'm going to add that to my bio. You're much
taller than I am, I'll tell you that.
I don't think so, but anyway, thanks for the compliment. I'm going to add that onto my bio. The company itself, where we are right now, like as you indicated, we started up in 2019, and we were going great guns. The pandemic hurt us. But we're coming back around and getting a great deal more interest right now. Unfortunately, the pandemic hurt a lot of startups in the cannabis industry, whether it's labs and or oil manufacturers, cultivators, whatever. But it seems like the industry is poised to come back on strongly now. There's an obvious increasing demand for the product throughout the country right now. And we're seeing a high number of states going towards recreational, as well as possible legislation going through Congress right now, introduced by a Republican of all things, to make recreational legal throughout the country. And of course, testing labs, we guarantee the safety of the product. Every state is basically introducing or mandating safety testing of all the products, which, surprisingly enough, was never required when it was being promoted for medicinal purposes, which is kind of astounding that safety compliance testing was not required for something that was being promoted to have medicinal uses. But that has changed now. So where we are, the testing basically. If you remember, there have been a few outbreaks of people acquiring lung infections or problems from vape cartridges that had not been tested, and that was because they either had vitamin E acetate or camdium or other pesticides contained within. We test for 67 pesticides, 8 heavy metals, microbial infections, water content, THC, CBD percentages, terpenes, and other matters. Basically, it's about 110 things that we test for. And then we approve it for consumption by the public. And where I see the industry growing right now, in New York, I think just this last week, they put a bill on the governor's desk to kind of kick into gear the legalization back there. I know people can possess up to 3 ounces in New York without repercussion. But I believe it's been very slow getting dispensaries off the ground there, for recreational at least. And in terms of getting testing labs off the ground, prior to this year, the only testing labs you really found in New York were those that had been licensed and authorized by the DEA, which, mind you, was a bit tight-fisted. They only authorized 2, and they were purely for academic research. So I see the industry growing quickly. There are no big players in the laboratory testing industry right now, nobody with national reach. I hope for us to be one of the first, and adding on to Illinois and Michigan, New York, Virginia, and Florida. Part of our corporate policy is early entry into the market and obtaining significant market share. We are, generally speaking, the Marijuana Business Journal, which is the cannabis version of the Wall Street Journal, in a study coming out, I think a little over a year ago, indicated that testing labs were profitable 95% of the time, which gives us the highest profitability ratio of any sector in the industry right now. So after that introduction, let's hit a few more particulars. You guys got any questions you want me to?
Sure. Well, I'd like to, Dave, with your permission, bring Gary Smith in. He's been involved in this company also for some time and has his own purview into its potential success here. Gary, would you please chime in on what you see as the future of the company and what you'd like to see it do in terms of its own growth?
Sure. Thank you, Mitchell, and thank you, David. I met a gentleman a couple years ago who summed up the marijuana industry in 9 words. Someone grows it, someone sells it, someone smokes it. I thought that was very humorous.
Good one.
However, there's 4 words. Someone tests it.
Yes.
Someone tests it. And
he
again,
was short 3 words, that brilliant fellow.
Yeah. And so now, we found it very kind of curious, ironic, and even amusing that marijuana would be legal for medicinal purposes but require no testing. But when it became for recreational use, the states required testing. Now, this sort of leads up to the fact that I find the industry in a very, very clumsy state of being. Think of the 19-teens and the 1920s when all the bootleggers were being made illegal in the hills of Appalachia, and as the big conglomerates took over, the whiskey and the bourbon industry. A lot of beautiful small businesses are being forced out. Big players are coming in. There's heavy taxation. It's a very complicated and difficult scene for a lot of people. But the states that have legalized marijuana have made it very, very clear that testing now is important, and it needs to be highly professional, not vertically integrated, where a grower can have his own product tested by his own company. It must be by an independent lab, and it requires a company that actually understands the people in the business. And so Steve and I, having been around this industry for a long time, understand that a lot of the people in the business are sort of unusual characters.
Good description, Gary.
Really.
Yeah.
Leftovers from the 60s.
It's gone from an outlaw industry to a generally commercially acceptable industry in the last 10 years.
Good.
And of course, a lot of the outlaws are around. So.
Yeah, and so what happens, what's really fascinating now is you're getting very big money coming in the business. People coming in with $10 and $20 million. And you have 3 parties involved. You have some wealthy funder coming from an entirely different industry who hires a professional business person to manage the operation, and that person hires a former outlaw or pirate who's a cannabis junkie who really knows and has been growing for 20 or 30, has been growing for 20 years. So you have 3 different players involved in the industry. And the great thing about the cannabis industry is that we found that the growers themselves, the guys and gals who are in charge of the grow operations, are really good people, not competitive, happy to share information, and just a delightful group to work with. And
that they are.
Was experience in Michigan when we met many people there. So it's really a fascinating time, but it's still a clumsy time because government legislation and even the federal tax laws are still very strange in the cannabis industry, as any of the professionals out there know. The good thing about the cannabis business for laboratories is laboratories are not burdened with the Section 205 exclusion of operating expenses, which, as you all know, is a very crippling thing for the industry at this time, and we hope to see will change in the near future.
Well, it makes our sector far more profitable too. And let me interject something here and follow up to a couple of the issues that Gary raised. You know, his analogy back to the days of Prohibition is fairly accurate. When Prohibition ended in, 33? I think you started out, it was right after Roosevelt took office, literally within 3 months.
33.
Yeah, 33. So, you know, you started out right in that beginning. I mean, there were something like 2,500 licenses given out for brewers, you know, whiskey or brewers or whatever. And that quickly, within 5 years, dwindled down to somewhere in the 200 to 300 range. There was a consolidation. The big boys came into play. And we're seeing that same thing in the cannabis industry, being driven primarily by high taxes and, you know, high fees. And that's, you know, initially when California at least, you know, legalized it, they really made an effort to sustain the mom and pop growers, you know, the people who were basically, you know, just in it to take care of their families. Maybe they grossed netted out 100 to 200,000 a year. But all of them have basically been forced out of the business. We've already seen that consolidation happening in California. And now, you know, we're really kind of fighting against that. One of the nice things in the laboratory business is you don't really have any big players. And we could conceivably be one of the big five throughout the country. But one of the reasons for this, and this is a problem with, whenever you mix politics into the law, which is almost inevitable, what usually results is something similar to what Dr. Frankenstein would put together. It isn't pretty, and it is clumsy. And part of the issue with that is that when state legislatures pass these laws, they sell it to the voters or they sell it to, you know, the opposing party that, hey, think of how much money we're going to make on taxing this. And so what you have is a very high tax rate, an effective tax rate and fee rate that's about 45% in California. And what it does is it's a breeding ground for black market growers, because as the profit margin drops, I've had a lot of clients who were licensed growers who basically on the side have said, I can't make any money over here anymore, so I'm going to do black market because, you know, 50% of the money I make does not have to go to pay fees and whatever. And
low taxes.
low
to no. Steve, in our last few minutes here, I want to steer the conversation to something that you kind of been harping on a little bit subtly, which is the quality of the testing and lab testing business and the incredibly important position it plays in the overall industry. And I know you are now building the company again post-COVID, so to speak, and you are looking for investors, you're looking for people in various legal states to come forward and play. Could you just speak a little bit about that and what you're looking for, and so people listening could tune in and see if they want to play with us?
All right. Well, you start out, first of all, testing is going to be mandatory. We are an absolute, unavoidable chain or link in the chain of commerce. You know, our business is built in. We're licensed by fed, state, and local communities. Our profit margins, as I referenced earlier in the Marijuana Business Journal study, we're profitable 95% of the time. The rate of return is fantastic. Over 4 years, about 300%.
Let me do a little arithmetic.
And that's, you know, our long-term plan here is to open up in about 10 states and then do an IPO, right? Right now it's a little difficult because each state has a very protective legislation that says only, if you're an in-state laboratory or in-state people, you get a preferential treatment, and it's been that way in a number of states. So, and then we unify them all under Unitec Delaware, and that will be the company that we eventually take public.
Got it.
The profitability rate, one of the nice things about a laboratory is that at any one point in the business, you can always liquidate for more than the total amount of investment. The laboratory we had in California cost me $3.5 million to get up, and after a year and a half, we sold it for $12. So, and that was before the pandemic. Prices are probably a little off right now, but it still is a fantastic profit margin.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Sign me up, please, Steve. Put me on the top of the list if you would.
Well,
Gary,
now we are looking for investors. We're looking for investors for the New York lab and Virginia and Florida. So
excellent. So appreciate your input here, Gary Smith. I would love to have you weigh in for the last couple of moments here.
Yeah, I want to say very quickly that for me personally, what I'm most excited about in the cannabis industry is I think there'll be incredible achievements in medicine that's coming through cannabis. We're going to see even more breakthroughs with treatments on cancer, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's. I think we're going to see a massive breakthrough in the next 10 years.
Epilepsy.
I agree with that.
Cataracts.
I think it's absolutely true.
And I want to be part of that, and testing is essential for that. So, we encourage people to contact us.
Unitec Laboratories.
It's beautiful. Gary, I so appreciate the point you're making about the expanded role of the use of medical marijuana in the world of medicine. Endocannabinoid system, it has been discovered we have. It's like we have our own cannabis-based nervous system. That's how extraordinary that plant is relative to human physiology. So I totally commend the work that both of you are doing in this space. It's really helping to advance civilization. That's how I feel about it.
The industry in this particular sector are poised for a tremendous amount of growth, both through, the expanded application for medical purposes, as well as guaranteeing the safety of product use for the recreational user. Right now, if you had to look at it, I would consider it to be something like Facebook or Google in their first year of operation in terms of the growth potential and the profit potential.
Oh, that is quite an analogy.
Growing.
Steve, from your mouth.
I kind of like that one.
Exactly. Dave Katzmeyer, I'd love to just turn it back over to you and for your final comments here.
Well, Stephen Taylor, CEO, and Gary Smith, Chairman of Unitec Laboratories. I was fascinated by going through your site. A lot of people don't think about how important this link has grown. That testing has become a major aspect of the industry in itself and an indispensable link in the chain. And going through your website at uniteclaboratories.com, it's amazing at all the different services that you provide and that testing can do. And you have them all detailed there beautifully. This is a place where a lot of growers and other people turn because they need the testing, an essential link in a growing field, expanding as fast as any field since computer industry from the mid-'80s to today, and it's going to grow further. Gentlemen, you are part of a company that's a leader and growing in the forefront of this expanding industry. And thank you both for being here, and we thank Mitchell Rabin of ABetterWorld.net, who is our link to this important and vital link to the cannabis industry. Gentlemen, I thank you all for being here today on America's Cannabis Conversation. And I'll conclude by saying you can hear this and other interviews in our archive at W420radionetwork.com. I'm David Katzmeyer. Thank you for tuning in.
W420radionetwork.com.